So we have this profile, this psychological profile of an authoritarian sociopath. The high-power people, they lie, they cheat, they steal, and they feel good about it, right? And they're harsher in their judgment of others, and they're more lenient on themselves. But we also have this category of obedient people, and I would argue that obedient people, like the willfully obedient, the enthusiastically obedient, are also authoritarian sociopaths. If you look at the Nolan chart, for example, the opposite of authoritarian is not subjugated. The opposite of authoritarian is libertarian. So the obedient are in the authoritarian quadrant. They just happen to be on the wrong side of the coin. But what the studies suggest is that these obedient people, they become murderous. They become capable of murder. They become tolerant of abuse. They engage in horizontal discipline of each other against those who would revolt or protest. And they become facilitators of evil. They possess the sense of legitimacy, the same as those in power possess the sense of legitimacy. So I want to kind of close with a warning, and that is to suggest that none of you are immune, that I'm not immune, that if you look at the Stanford prison experiment again, Philip Zimbardo was the opposite of what he became. He was a man who was conducting an experiment because he was opposed to power, because he wanted to reveal the illegitimacy and the corruption of prison power. And he instead was seduced by his position after 72 hours into being a corrupt authority, into being corrupted by power. So he called this situational power. And the thing that I think we all have to understand is that most of us in our day-to-day lives are not in a situation of power, and so we're free to philosophize, and we're not really challenged as to our grit, as to our adherence to these principles that we espouse. But if we're going to go into an elected office, if we're going to go into if we're going to become a police officer, or we're going to become a prison guard, or we're going to become a TSA agent, we are entering into a position of situational power, and it will have these psychological effects on us if we regard those offices as legitimate. So what the science shows is that it's not bad apples, it's a rotten apple cart. And if you put a fresh apple in a rotten apple cart, it rots within 72 hours. That's what happens. So I want to suggest, I know that we have libertarian candidates that are very enthusiastic about their campaigns, and I know that a lot of libertarians often think about running for local dog catcher and other things like that. And I want you all to understand.
Local status catchers.
I want to recommend that all of you make fun of those people. And it's not because we don't support what they're doing, it's not because we don't like what they say, it's because we love them. I think that we should make fun of these people who run for office because we need to constantly remind them that the office is illegitimate. Even if their philosophy is legitimate, even if we elected them because we like what they have to say and what they believe, keeping them in the understanding that the position is illegitimate is the inoculation. It's what prevents them from becoming the thing that they were sent there to fight. And if you want to run for office, I would encourage you to really internalize that the office you're occupying is illegitimate. Otherwise, you will become the evil that you're trying to strike. And that's all I've got for you guys. I'm open to questions and answers. Yeah, Mark.
Hey, the Milgram experiment is available in a film called The Experiment on Big Ass Torrents, kat.cr, as is the Stanford prison experiment in a film called The Stanford Prison Experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And they're both very good. They're both highly accurate.
And they're free on YouTube.
What?
They're free on YouTube.
I didn't realize that. I could have gone. I didn't have to go all that trouble. So anyway, and I could have felt less guilty.
Yeah.
But sorry, no problem. Go ahead.
I was going to ask you about the humor portion. Is there a type? Did they test different types of humor? Was it making fun of the individual, caricatures? Did it have to do with the office itself, or?
No, those suggestions came from the section in the scientific method that's suggestions for further research. Essentially, in that experiment, it was the self-reporting of the subject, whether they felt their power was legitimate or not. And so satire is my favorite way of exposing illegitimacy, but there are likely other ways. But yeah, absolutely an avenue for further study. Yeah.
So would you ever consider adapting some sort of training directly for police officers?
And the illegitimacy of their positions?
Yeah. Solving, giving them a problem, what can you do for them?
You know, I've never considered that, but I'll go on the record right now. If any police department wants to host me for such a workshop, I will have something ready by the time they give me time to do it.
So proposition for you. Come up with the material and we'll help you find
Yeah,
your
that's
place
really
on it.
interesting. It's almost like sensitivity training and stuff. I know departments get sensitivity training from time to time.
Idea.
So, yeah.
I mean, could that be interpreted as trying to train them as they are servants of the public versus overlords of the public?
Yeah, what is their legitimate role?
Right.
Yeah, that would be a good way to frame it.
Does it need to get a bunch of comedians to make fun of them until they no longer take their power seriously?
Right. Yeah.
I heard a conversation recently that instead of saying that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, there's a thinking that it's actually that power attracts the corruptible. But some of the studies you're talking about will indicate, especially because these things were randomly assigned.
Exactly.
Yeah, so just could you speak to that?
So none of these studies would address the proposition that power attracts the corrupt. That might also be true. But what these studies do demonstrate is that that power does corrupt. That you could send a good apple into a position of power and they would become corrupt. So that proposition is definitely true. I like to say, and corrupt power deserves no obedience. I like to amend other people's quotes. It's odd.
And I can follow that. Sounds like then that yes, power does attract the corruptible, but power also does corrupt. So it's
Yeah.
both and, not one or the other.
Probably.
Yeah, okay.
Are there any
They're
others?
always
Yeah, Mark.
they're always counterexamples, because, again, because they don't all become corrupt. But mostly, self-important people seek this kind of position. And it's the self-important people that you have to watch.
Sure.
You know, and it's rare that you find people who are truly selfless in positions like that, people who are truly interested in just service. So, but there was one study you talked about where one group identified feelings in others, whereas another group actually took on feelings. So there would seem to be a distinction between empathy and cynicism in that study.
So that study, it was that the listeners to stories are hooked up to, I guess both subjects are hooked up to an EKG, and low power people experienced stress in response to the storyteller's stress, and high power people didn't. The researchers call that detachment, not cynicism,
Okay.
but similar for sure. Are there any others? Yeah.
Yeah, this reminded me of a quote, kind of a famous quote of Rudolf Diels, who was the head of the Gestapo prior, in 1933-34, prior to Himmler and Heydrich, and he got kicked out, but he was at the beginning of this, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's great in Germany, he says that when we started this, we realized that he had to find people that not everybody could do this job, right? This job that was required the Gestapo secret police and beating up people and interrogating and things. He said, but, so of course he found after a year that he had attracted pretty much every sadist in Germany and Austria. They wanted the position, they wanted that job, but they still needed more people. So he said, so then they continued to hire people, and these were people that didn't know whether they could do the job or like the job. But after being in it for a while, they got used to it. They decided, okay, yeah, we can be Gestapo as well. And then the third thing he said, I don't understand it. Coming to your point, he said, I don't understand it, but maybe Freud can understand it. But then we had people that didn't want to do these horrible things. They actually said, no, I'm okay being a secret policeman, but I want to behave this way. But then they, after a time, got used to it and decided they liked it as well. This is what Rudolph
Right.
said. Yeah.
So this was Philip Zimbardo, in his book, The Lucifer Effect. Like half of the Lucifer Effect is about the Stanford prison experiment, but the other half is sort of an indictment of the military brass who established the Abu Ghraib prison. And he argued that if you look at the way that the Abu Ghraib prison was set up, it's almost as if they modeled it on the Stanford prison experiment. And if you looked at the careers of those soldiers, they had not exhibited sadistic behavior before other than enlisting. And that it looked as though the people who set up the prison did it in such a way as to ensure that torture would happen, but have plausible deniability. So they never had to give the orders, but they knew because of Stanford that given vague rules, given simple tasks, and given creative license, people would evolve that or deal that way. And it's even good people, for sure. But yeah, you have a question?
So I'm a midshipman at the University of Minnesota, and I cry about it routinely on why everyone around me is an authoritarian. And we get a presidentially signed commission upon graduation, instructing us to enforce the Uniform Code of Military Justice. How would you recommend that we introduce this thought that our power is not legitimate, even though we have this presidentially signed order to do these things, to try to curb that authoritarianism within the U.S. Navy?
I don't know what this certificate is. Is this like a diploma essentially?
It's a commission, a presidential commission to follow the UCMJ and carry out the laws that we are subject to.
Well, as an individual, I suppose the easiest thing to do would be to demonstrate in some way, to refuse to accept it or to destroy it or to make a public demonstration that you don't believe in the legitimacy of the paper. But as a group, as a college, is that what you mean? You want at the college level?
How do we spread it around within that we're supposed to be promoting liberty, where a lot of them, they will blindly follow orders that are unconstitutional even?
Can we chat afterwards? Because I don't quite understand the scene you're painting for me. I'm gonna have to get a better idea of what the thing is and what you're up to. Yeah? Here? Yeah. Sorry, Mark, you've spoken twice, so I'm always going to pick you when no one else is raising their hand. But we'll talk after too. Yeah,
I was under the impression that the modified version of the Milgram study had been done, or modified versions have been done, where they actually grouped like people by personalities, where they had a person, had a group of people who were going to go along, get along, good grades, work with others well. And then they had like the other people.
There have been a variety of different iterations of the study. I have not perused all of the results. I know that a lot of them based them on, like they got into more specific categories. They especially, there's a comparison of national categories, like when it's performed in France versus when it's performed in Ireland versus when it's performed in wherever. But as far as what I've read, the results are always similar. So, like maybe it's not always exactly 65%. There might be statistical significant differences by demographic or by region, but it's always a majority, and it's always enough to run a prison camp.
But are you aware of a study where for example, the people that had the reputation of being, good with, basically, good, cheerful, good people skills also, it was like a 70-some%. It was more of a majority.
Oh, that's interesting.
The people that were grouped in the categories like grouchy, don't get along with others, are always asking questions, that kind of thing. That it was a minority.
You know what that reminds me of? In the Stanford prison experiment, there were two prisoners that were the most unruly and the most unwilling to accept their identity, and one was a devout Christian and one was a devout communist. And the sort of theory was, because they had an ideology outside of the prisoner identity that was informing them, and in contradiction to the situational power structure, they were less willing to accept the fictional identity. And so it might be that your happy-go-lucky, get along with everybody person is empty. And so they're more willing to just follow orders. Whereas the person who is grouchy and unpleasant, it's maybe because they're more accustomed to rejecting other people and therefore more willing to resist. That's totally my speculation, but I want to read that study.
If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything.
Yeah, thank you. It's more concise. Yeah.
Hey, I'm wondering if you're aware of the UK's Monster Raving Mooning Party.
No.
If not, I suggest you check them out. I suggest you all check them out. Because they engage in satire. They are a legitimate political party in the UK. Monster Raving Mooning Party. And they are over the top in their satire. I fell in love with them at the last election.
So we're over time. I'm happy to keep talking if you guys want to keep talking, but I know there's an after party. So stay here if it's voluntary.